Well, good morning, and I will also kick off my timer here as well. I hang around with pastors too much, and we just tend to start our closings before we start our introductions and multiples and all that. I'd like to first of all just take a moment to acknowledge several heroes in the room. Most of us involved in this arena have often heard or said, "Where are the pastors? If pastors would just," right? Well, we have many that are around the state, but several that are here today that I particularly want to recognize as I start, because they are doing this. And we'll start at the front. Pastor Steve Brands from San Antonio, Texas, one of our heroes in the state of Texas, standing here over there. For example, Pastor Hernan Castano, his wife Wendy back here, from Houston, Texas, one of the Houston Five. Pastor Tom Wynn, his wife, that are here with us in Houston also, and also one of Houston Five that will be here in the Valley. And about 4 years ago, I sat in a courtroom in Wharton, Texas. Now, there are more exciting places to be, but not that day. And Kevin Roberts is here today, who has been very involved in this particular case, but I sat there literally watching something unfold that I could never have imagined a few years before. And the reason that's relevant to today is because I realized at that moment, sitting in a courtroom, that we were going to need state legislation that specifically codifies the definition of male and female. That's right. Who'd have thunk, right? But I sat there and watched two attorneys battle it out with a biology lesson on the screens about what's male and female. And I thought, I can't believe this is a parallel universe here. But this was in a tragic case of a firefighter named Tommy Erguz, who was killed in the line of duty. And turns out that he had been tricked into marrying what was not a woman. I won't get into all the details of the case, but I've sat there, I've talked with his parents, I heard the whole story. And the whole case is just an amazing story that needs to fully be told. But it's working its way through the courts because, obviously, and in that case, we did have a judge who did the right thing, who nullified the marriage, said this person was not born a woman, therefore this marriage is not valid, and I'm nullifying the marriage. So thank God for that judge. But of course they appealed it, and now we're sitting before the state Supreme Court right now with this case. This family's been drugged through the court system because a transgender has been fighting for this standing. Now, how does that play out in all these other cities around the state of Texas, and why do we need this? Because as we now know, in Houston, San Antonio, Plano, and other places all over the state now, we're calling our little whack-a-mole game, where these little ordinances are popping up where they're now codifying protections for sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. What's gender expression? Now in Plano, they decided in their ordinance that you could have your sex as one thing and your gender expression is something else. There are two different definitions. So your sex is the biological makeup of what you're born with, but your gender expressions is how you play it out. Okay? Now imagine what that does to a business owner trying to monitor his restrooms. Okay? It's just horrific. But first of all, we have to step back to first principles here. And that's what we really realized as we have reached out and organizing pastors around the state with a core mission of moving the pastors and the church back into the ministry of godly citizenship and taking responsibility from the pulpits that this is God's government. As we talked about marriage earlier being created by God, that wasn't the first thing created by God, right? First of all, God created what? The heavens and the earth. And it took form. And then God created man in his likeness, right? Then God created woman for a man. And then God brought the two together in a union that no man should tear asunder. Then family, and then so forth, right? Think about this for a moment, because where we are at right now in our public policy is a reflection of where we are in our culture, as it always will be. Those of you familiar with one wonderful quote, it's one of my favorites, from our founding father, John Adams. He said, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Preceding that, he said, our government no government is armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Greed, avarice, ambition would break the cords of the Constitution as a whale goes through a net. We're living in an hour where that free fall morally, because of our bankruptcy spiritually, is now playing itself out in the courts of our land. So we can't expect laws in the courts to solve the root problem here. That's what our challenge to the pastors is. We have to re-engage. We have to teach truth. We have to be willing to stand publicly, not hiding behind our pulpits, just preaching to the choir, if you will. And we've got to start there. Because frankly, most of the Christians today do not have a biblical apologetic that they can articulate about why we should stand for marriage, why we should stand for life, why we should stand for freedom, why we should stand for good government. So that's where we got to start, and that's where we are encouraging. And I will say this, I'm inspired because pastors all over the state of Texas and all over America are rising up. They're meeting the challenge. Fayetteville, Arkansas, good example. Since Houston started our battle last year, when Mayor Denise Parker proposed her almost as bad as San Antonio ordinance, and we began this year-long battle now. Between that time, Fayetteville, Arkansas City Council passed a similar ordinance, and it was also very egregious. But those pastors and those people rose up last fall, and with the assistance of groups like us and Family Resource Council and Black Robe Regiment, came alongside of them. They gathered signatures, put it on the ballot, filed a court battle, and defeated that ordinance and repealed it in December of last year. So there are victories that are occurring all over the country. I want to encourage you about that. And they're going to happen here too. We have bureaucrats in the city, and just a quick nod to Houston, those of you familiar with our battle there, which took, of course, an international platform when the mayor and her minions, and my apologies to the concept of minions. Now, minions do not need to be degraded any longer by that term. Those of you who don't know what I mean, you don't have kids watching Despicable Me, but I'm sorry. Decided to subpoena pastors for 17 different categories of items, including, but not limited to, sermon materials, notes, texts, and communications, not just on this ordinance, but on homosexuality, Mayor Denise Parker, and so forth. And one category, all communications with your congregation in regards to the same things, and any materials in your possession. In other words, Pastor Branson, if you had a sermon on your shelf, or a book, or a CD set from Charles Stanley, you had to hand that over to the court. They wanted everything. So now the outrage was obviously so great that, and internationally, that, and frankly, I'll tell you this as a gift from God, because I really believe in the feedback we've gotten all over the country is the anger and the spark that generated before the November election helped us win a few seats here and there for freedom and family. So I don't think that's what Mayor Denise Parker had in mind, but that's what she got. But here's the issue for us. In this legislative session, this is no longer an option. I actually raised this issue before the last legislative session with a meeting we had with some of our leaders, and everybody kind of gave me this funny look, like, you have to do what? Define male and female? So that is an issue. Now, frankly, we have a bill filed now. State Representative Deborah Riddle has filed a bill. We're going to be looking at that. But there are others that have been filed also to address some of these other issues that we have to deal with on a state level. Why should cities or counties or school boards be allowed to create their own categories of characteristics that they're going to add to discrimination protections, then use the punitive power of government to criminalize those who oppose them? And that's exactly what's happening in the state of Texas right now, San Antonio, Texas, where essentially they start out saying, if you've ever spoken against homosexuality, you cannot hold public office. Now that, in its full scope, didn't make the final version, but something very close to it did. That's still in law. So this is where they're going. They've already broadcast what they're at. And those of you who are following nationwide, Barronelle Stutzman, little lady from Richland, Washington, my home state, I have to admit, is losing her business and her home and her assets and her livelihood and everything about because she simply declined to do flowers for a same-sex wedding. The state attorney general of the state of Washington is prosecuting this little lady, as well as the civil court punishments, saying we're going to take everything you have. Wow. Oregon, same thing to the Kleins. This is coming in Texas if we don't stop this now. So I'm just telling you folks that we need our legislators, and I'm not accepting any excuses, and we're going to be knocking on doors and making calls. We're bringing pastors from all over the state, And we're saying this session, right now in the state of Texas, we're going to stop this freight train and protect our freedoms, our families, our religious liberty, and the basic fundamentals of decency. One of the big sparks and frankly, one of the overreaches of this that helped us in Houston was the restroom issue, where because of these ordinances, and this is uniform in all of them, because again, gender expression, and I'll quote Plano particularly, because it's even kind of more humorous than Houston's, your gender expression is your deeply felt sense of gender. I don't know what that means either, but I guess it means if this morning I got up feeling like a woman, that I can use the women's restroom. And there's not an attorney in this. Yeah, by the way, no, I won't go into that. I mean, honestly, it's like we're living in a comic book, but it's just real. It's in the ordinance. It's on the books. Wow. Okay? So this is what I'm saying, folks, is we cannot have a situation in which cities in Texas, we have 254 counties, I don't know how many cities we have, every one of them could create their own new categories of characteristics and then punish those who oppose them. We cannot have that. So we have to create a standard uniform at the state level that says you cannot do that. You cannot create a protected class or characteristic that does not exist in state or federal law, period. Okay? And there's a bill that has been filed to do that. And Debbie Riddle, Jim Leach, I believe there's a couple others that are looking at, so we're going to be looking at combined language or what's the best way to approach that. But those are things right now that are just things that we have to do. Now on a broader scale, we're including, and we support everything that's been proposed to you today too. We're encouraging our pastors around the state. Those of you who are attending a church, make sure that you go back to your pastor and say, we need you to be leading us from the pulpit, speaking to these issues, and then helping coordinate with other pastors in the community so there's a united voice across racial denominational lines standing for biblical righteousness. This isn't about partisanship. It's about the Word of God and its truth and its application to all peoples of all times. And we're not making this stuff up. That's right. Our position is, and I'll tell these, look, don't argue with me, argue with him. He wrote it, okay? And that's real simple, because when we look at one of the beautiful things that I saw play out in the courtroom in Houston over 3 weeks as we sat in a courtroom fighting for a basic right to vote, taken away by this mayor, who simply said, I'm not going to let, in fact, we have affidavits sworn by pastors and a city council member on file, on record, with the mayor of Houston saying, I will not let the people vote on my civil rights. Okay, that's what this has been about. So we went from a very bad ordinance to a theft of voting rights, to an attack on the Constitution in the sequence of this whole thing. But what we're reminded about, what I saw in spite of what the enemy meant for evil and God used for good, is welding and forging relationships together that can literally only occur in the heat of combat. And those of you who have served, you know exactly what I'm saying. Those of you who have been in combat, there's something about that experience. And when you walk away from that, those who have shared that experience, that transcends anything else. I've watched this happen now with our pastors, with an 86-year-old civil rights African-American leader from the Houston Old Guard Black community, church leader, standing shoulder to shoulder with the epitome of religious conservative Anglo pastors, literally side by side. That's something that's new, and that's something that God is doing, and only God can do. So I want to encourage you in that there's a lot of things happening right now under the surface, but finally I'll close by saying this. We live in a conservative state. We live in a pro-family, pro-freedom, pro-Second Amendment, pro-First Amendment, pro-religious freedom state. I thank God for Texas. And God brought us here 16 years ago. And like I said, I look back at my home state that has literally fallen off the cliff, and it grieves me. So I thank God for what we have, where we are, but do not take it for granted, because right now, at this moment, every major city in the state of Texas is a sea of blue. You know that? You have a conservative state being run by liberal cities. Okay? Dallas, San Antonio, Houston, Austin are governed by liberal, anti-family, anti-life, anti-freedom bureaucrats in the midst of all of our other things. So we have to take our cities back too, right? That's councils, guess what? Our pastors have been getting a very first-hand civics lesson on the importance of city councils. I wish I could count how many times in the last couple months I heard, how did this happen in Plano? Because that only follows how many times I heard it, how did this happen in San Antonio? How many times, how did this happen in Houston? How do you elect a lesbian mayor in the heart of the Bible Belt? Guess what? You go to sleep. And that's what we did. The church had been asleep, morally asleep, biblically asleep. And we have to decide right now that that's going to change. So this legislation, all of it, is good and righteous, and it's needed, and I urge your support and activity. But go back to your churches, go back to your home areas and say, we got to take this turf too. Because if we're going to change Austin, we got to change Houston, we got to change San Antonio, we got to change Dallas, we're going to change all over the state, and change the hearts of the people, and then stand up for righteousness and be willing to do what God has called us to do, and all those before us. And David, I was reminded in some studies this last week, and I love this illustration. You know, in 2 Chronicles 3, when Solomon is dedicating the temple, and when they're going through, they built the temple, they're dedicating the temple was built on what ground, right? Right, Mount Moriah. What happened? What else happened up there? Right, we see that. It was where the ground, where the threshing floor, where this altar was built by David. Why did he pick that ground? What happened there before? Remember this Abraham-Isaac thing? God used a sequence of his work of atonement to provide his salvation to those that were lost, and the sequence of atonement and righteousness. But when you look at the thing that David said, and I just love this allegory, and I'll close. When he came to that ground, was told by God to build an altar. What did he say? He was offered it for free, right? Remember that? And what did he say? I will not offer to my God anything that costs me nothing. And that's our charge today, and our pastors, and we're calling our pastors. This is a moment for all of us, and I thank God for all those pastors of character in every city, every town that are standing for righteousness. So let's get this job done in Austin this year, and let's finish taking our cities. God bless you. Thank you.